A significant shift in this country's political landscape. The federal Liberals have cut a deal with the NDP. The terms are keep Justin Trudeau in power until 2025 and see NDP priorities get implemented like dental care and pharmacare. Why did NDP leader Jagmeet Singh agree to the deal? Let's ask him right now. Mr. Singh joins us here in Ottawa. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you.
Really good to see you too. Thank you.
Why did you need to guarantee the government would stay in power until 2025 to get programs you wanted on their agenda? You have successfully done that in a number of instances throughout the pandemic. I can think of specific examples here. Why is a formal agreement necessary?
Well, there's a couple reasons for it. One is it's been a really tough 2 years. Canadians are have dealt with a pandemic. We've got a cost of living going up and now a war that makes everyone feel less safe. And given that context, the instability of not knowing how long this government or our parliament is going to last is another additional worry or fear or just pressure that people might feel. And so we wanted to give some stability. But we also know that there's really meaningful things that people need right now. They've asked us to work together to deliver that help. And so we've used our power to get help for people. And some of the programs that we want to put in place, the help that we need for people, is going to take some time. And so we need time to make sure we deliver. And we want a blueprint or an outline of exactly what we're going to do for folks. And we want to be able to hold the Liberals to account by pointing to the agreement saying, you've committed to this, now let's get it done.
But respectfully, for example, when you wanted to see the federal government backstop sick days, you were able to negotiate that through offering support on just one, a case-by-case basis. Can you understand Canadian skepticism now that you're backing the government for until 2025 when you could have achieved what you want to achieve for them on their behalf, as you characterize it, through the case-by-case basis through which you were already doing?
We were able to bring some significant wins for people and help people out in the pandemic, looking at it case by case. It was difficult to do longer projects, things like bringing in dental care, which will take time to phase in. And so that's something that requires longer term planning. What we've been able to achieve with this agreement is to use our power to bring in every single 12-year-old under 12 will get dental care that doesn't have coverage now in 2022. And then that'll be expanded to include every child under 18 who doesn't have coverage, as well as seniors and people living with disabilities by 2023, and then a full implementation of our plan by 2025. This is going to make a transformational difference in people's lives. I've met with so many people that tell me that they can't afford to get their teeth looked after. It is a matter of dignity, a matter of not feeling comfortable in their own skin, and not feeling comfortable in their communities. And this will make a massive difference for health and for people's quality of life.
And I certainly don't take away from any of those arguments, but did you need to guarantee your support of a government until 2025 to see that happen?
Well, the guarantee is really if they're doing what we need, if they are making sure that we deliver on things like dental care, if they're putting in place a permanent legislation around childcare, for example, if they're meeting these things, they're meeting our agenda, they're meeting the things that are going to actually help Canadians, then we're going to continue to support. But at any time, if they don't actually meet these really important criteria, these important things that are going to help people out, then we'll stop. I'm coming into this with the hope that we can actually make this work, but I'm also very wide-eyed. And if at any point in time, despite how hard we fight or push to make these things happen, if they don't, we can always withdraw our support. But it lays out what we can do for the next couple of years. People elected this minority government. Governments normally last a 4-year term. That's what's been, that's the legislated term. And so what we're doing is making sure that for the term of this government, that it works for people. And we've outlined really clear criteria that need to be met for us to continue to support. And that criteria is getting help to people.
When I listen to you describe that, it sounds like you're fighting back against the argument that this is carte blanche for the Liberals. And when you talk about being able to remove your support if they don't comply with what's outlined in the agreement. But on that point, I listened very closely to your press conference today. You answered a lot of questions, and a lot of them were about this very issue. At what point do you pull the pin? What is your red line? You did not offer a specific answer. If, for example, they don't implement dental care fully by 2025, if the plan is to do it by 2027, like is that, then you pull your support. How actually are you going to hold them to account?
Well, exactly. I said it earlier, and I'm happy to say it again. The metrics are laid out. So one concrete example is we have worked into this agreement that every child under 12 that does not have coverage right now for getting their teeth looked after should have that in place by 2022. So this budget coming up, and in this year, if that's not achieved, that will be a clear departure from our agreement, and that is a reason to withdraw. If in 2023 we don't see the expansion to include every child under 18 and seniors and people living with disabilities to get coverage that don't already have coverage, that's another marker that would show that there is not, we can't continue that. So every step of the way, whether it's for childcare, whether it's for housing investments so that people can find a home they can afford, or whether it's to fight the climate crisis, we've got clear parameters put into this agreement that have to be met by a certain time. And if they're not, then we can point to it and say, not just us, we invite the public to look at this document. It's publicly available. Journalists have access to this document. And we'll all be looking to see, are you meeting what you've committed to do? And if the government hasn't, then we will have the recourse of withdrawing our support.
So how, in your first answer, you outlined that it's a scary time, an unstable time. This provides an antidote to that. How is it, if you can pull your support at any time then, how is it that much more stable? Well,
that's the thing. I mean, it's being framed in the negative by lots of questions, and I understand those questions. I don't fault the questions. And that's why I always say I'm entering in this with the good faith and the hope that we can actually make this work. I want this to work. And I've been given assurances that the Prime Minister also wants to make this work. And so given that that's the approach taken, we've got a document that we can point to that gives us clarity. This is what we've committed to. We want to see this coverage in place by a certain time. You've got to make it happen. And so I'm approaching it with the good faith that I want the agreement that we've entered into to work. I'm going to work and fight hard to make sure it is actually complied with. And so my interest is that this works. My interest isn't in finding ways to tear this apart before it's even begun. I want this to work because I want people to get help. And I am going to work hard and fight hard to make sure that that's what happens. But I'm not afraid to withdraw our support if we need to. I'm not entering with that mindset, though. I'm entering with the mindset, let's make Parliament work. Let's listen to what Canadians sent us here to do, which is to work for them. And we've laid out the priorities that we're going to work on.
Did you approach the Prime Minister about making this into a formal agreement, or was it the other way around?
Right away after the election in 2021, I met with my team, met with my MPs, and I said, we're in a minority government. I believe we should use this time to get help to people and make sure people get help. We know that this has been tough for lots of families and lots of people. Let's get them help. My team agreed. We had the support to go ahead, and we reached out to say, this is a minority government. How can we make it work? And so we started those discussions right away. Some of that was disclosed in the media, and we had some barriers and we couldn't go ahead, and we were able to pick that up, and now we've got this agreement which is going to be really meaningful and significant and substantial for people, real help for people who need it, and we've been able to use our power to get help to people.
So it wasn't, I'm just trying to understand how it went from those discussions that you referenced to this formal agreement. And was it you who instigated, asking, I want this to be more formalized, I think now is the time, or was it the Prime Minister?
There was collaboration. I don't want to take credit where it's not due. I believe in this. I push for it. I absolutely approached the government to say that these are our priorities, and that there was a willingness to work together, and that I want to acknowledge as well. But this is something that we absolutely wanted to see happen. We wanted to see people get help, and we knew that people want us to do that. People send us to Ottawa to fight for them, but also to make Parliament work for them. And that to me is really important. And I want people to know you can count on me to make Parliament work for you, and I'm going to fight to make sure you get help. And that's what we've done today. We've laid out some real significant help to get people that care for their teeth, to get people help for medication coverage, to get people help for housing, and to fight the climate crisis. Real key priorities that we've laid out before in our campaigns, and now we're able to work forward.
Just really quickly before I let you go, Mr. Singh, there is language in the document that you and the Liberals provided about this agreement that is not so specific. And I wondered if you could respond to what I'm sure the opposition is already raising and already worried about, that essentially you will aid the government in suppressing meaningful debate or meaningful questioning of witnesses or the calling of witnesses in committee. And I'm referencing here, other votes which impede the government from functioning may be declared confidence by the government, in which case the government will commit to informing the NDP, essentially stipulating that you won't not just not vote on non-confidence, but you will also, that extends to other votes which might support confidence votes. And then as well around committees, to ensure committees are able to continue their essential work. Is this an effort to shut down the Conservatives' efforts to question, the Conservatives' efforts to call witnesses that the Liberals just don't like?
Well, what we said is that we want Parliament to work. And for Parliament to work, there needs to be an effective opposition, and we are going to hold this government to account. It's really clearly written in the agreement that we parties will disagree, and that it is absolutely in no way precluded. We are not precluded from disagreeing, and we are going to disagree. We're going to raise questions. We're going to hold the government to account. We're going to hold government to account. There may be moments where the government deems something to be a confidence motion. We also said that there are things that, even if you deem them confidence, we're going to vote against. For example, back to work legislation was an example I gave, that you might deem that it's in order for confidence that this has to be passed. We're not going to support back to work legislation. So there's things that we're not going to support. But the spirit of this is cooperation, and the spirit of this is finding a way to make Parliament deliver the help that people need. That's really what we're about, but we're absolutely an independent party. We maintain our ability to hold government to account. We're an opposition party. We will oppose government where we see fit, but we also want to make sure we get help to people. And that is, for me, one of the most important things that I signed up for this job to do, to get help to people. And to me, today is one of the honors of my life to be able to deliver meaningful help, to get people their dental care, their teeth fixed, to help people with housing, to help people with the cost of medication. This is why I became a New Democrat, why I got into politics, and I'm honored to be able to get help to people who need it right now.
Are you worried that if you run in the next election asking Canadians to vote for you as the potential next Prime Minister, they'll just instead think that they're voting for someone who keeps someone else in power as Prime Minister?
I don't think so. I think what people have seen is when you elect 25 New Democrats, you get dental care, something that the Liberals and Conservatives voted against just 9 months.
Through another party, though.
But they voted against it 9 months ago. The Liberals and Conservatives voted against it 9 months ago. And we can point to that. We've got clear evidence. They voted against it 9 months ago. 9 months later, we were able to get it happen because we didn't give up. And we'll never give up. And I think people see the benefit of voting New Democrat is that you get results. You get help. You get someone that's on your side and someone that fights for you and someone that delivers. The Conservatives can't point to a single thing they've been able to do since it's a minority government to help people in any meaningful way. What is the point of voting Conservative when they haven't helped people when they needed help the most? What has a Bloc been able to do to help the people of Quebec? New Democrats have delivered more help for people in Quebec through increases to CERB, to supports for students, to bringing in paid sick leave supports than any other opposition party. We've shown that we can actually help people and give them the help they need. And now we've shown we can do it in a really significant way with expanding our healthcare system. And I'm going to put that to Canadians, and that's their choice. But your question is fair. If this means that it doesn't work out for us and this argument doesn't play out, I will have still been able to do something, and our team would have been able to do something meaningful for people, and that's more than enough for us. I hope that we can make that argument, but even if we can't, people will see that we fought for them and they get the help that they deserve.
Okay, Mr. Singh, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The Conservatives are calling this a desperate power grab. How will the Liberals convince Canadians it isn't? Dominic LeBlanc is Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. He's in Ottawa. Hi, Minister LeBlanc. Good to have you back.
Hi, Vashi. Good evening.
Minister, what tangibly are you going to be able to tell Canadians 3 years from now you accomplished that you wouldn't have been able to without this deal?
I think we're going to be able to accomplish a great deal, Vashi, of what we set out in our election platform, things that are important to Canadians around housing, the fight against climate change, improving the public healthcare system. What this agreement gives, I think, Canadians is reassurance that Parliament will work, that we'll be able to introduce legislation and, in spite of the Conservatives' best efforts, actually bring it to a vote, that budgets will be debated and then passed. So it's a sense of stability and focus for Parliament, Vashi. We thought for some time the Conservatives' main objective was to vandalize Parliament. And we think this sets out a series of shared priorities that we'll work on collaboratively. But it also means that we can count on parliamentary committees to function normally, and we can count on legislation ultimately to come to a vote, which will be important for Canadians receiving the improvements that we committed to them in the last election.
Why do you characterize the opposition asking questions about legislation or committee work as vandalism?
It's not the questions at all, Vashi. I've been an opposition MP. That's precisely the role of the opposition, holding government to account, inviting ministers to come to committees, including at a difficult moment, perhaps on a particular file. That's not the problem, but it's ensuring that a whole series of procedural hijinks make sure that hours and hours are wasted on useless concurrence in committee reports, putting up speakers over and over again to repeat the same thing on every single issue and sub-amendment. The Conservatives are masters at basically ensuring that Parliament can't function effectively in terms of allowing parliamentarians to vote. Democracy ultimately begins and ends with a vote. And if we've seen it for the last, frankly, 3 years, the Conservatives want to ensure that legislation never comes to a vote, that committees are not, in fact, able to propose amendments. We don't have majorities on these committees, Vashi. We expect parliamentary committees to amend legislation. But this gives some stability and some focus, we think, to the shared priorities that we had, including with the NDP, and that Canadians elected us on to deliver.
Here's what I don't understand, because let's say all of what you laid out is true. The Conservatives will obviously dispute the accuracy of your statements, but let's say for a second it is true. What precludes you from, on a given piece of legislation, on a given day of committee work, from securing the NDP's support, as you have so many times previously, on a case-by-case basis? Doesn't this agreement open you up to the criticism that it is a power grab simply to stay in power till 2025?
Well, it's obviously not a power grab, Vashi, if the majority of members of Parliament duly elected in the House of Commons vote on the government's budget and vote down no confidence votes and approve the spending estimates. So the idea that a parliament might actually function for a 4-year mandate shouldn't be seen as undemocratic or a power grab. What this does is also allow us to work in a very collaborative way with the NDP, as I said at the beginning, on a series of shared priorities that we have with them. So it brings a focus to our legislative work, as I said, reconciliation, housing, affordability issues, childcare, ensuring that the public healthcare system is responsive to the 21st century. All of these things we're anxious to work on. Many of those policy commitments overlap with NDP priorities. So now we'll be able to, in a very focused way, elaborate a legislative agenda that will actually put these measures into effect for Canadians.
I guess my point was just that in the past, you've been able to do that on a case-by-case basis, and so has the NDP. So I wonder how it's why is it difficult to understand how there's political skepticism around the need for a permanent agreement? But I also want to ask you about the costs associated with some of what you've promised here. For example, dental care, a big plank of the NDP's platform. At its peak, it'll cost about $1.88 billion a year. Shortly thereafter, it'll go to somewhere between $800 and $850 million a year. That's according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. You're running a deficit. The latest tally is $144 billion. Can Canada afford this agreement that you've made?
Of course, Canada can afford, Vashi, to have a modern, inclusive, accessible public healthcare system. The Conservatives want us to add $28 billion without conditions on a recurring basis, year after year after year, in healthcare. So if we choose to collaborate with the NDP on something as important as dental care for low-income families, starting with children in those low-income families, as part of a responsible financial framework that my colleague, the Minister of Finance, will lay out for Canadians in the upcoming budget, we absolutely think that these commitments are not only affordable, but will speak to a growth agenda. Fighting climate change for the Conservatives, for example, is a cost. We think it's part of having a modern, effective, inclusive economy. So we're excited about the upcoming budget, and a lot of the Conservative skepticism or exaggerations that we've seen in recent hours, we think will be clarified when Chrystia Freeland stands on her feet to deliver the budget in the coming weeks.
I understand the points that you're making, and certainly, like I said, I'm sure the Conservatives would characterize it differently. I'm not asking about how they're characterizing it. I'll do that when I speak to the leader of that party, Candice Bergen, and there are genuine questions. I agree on that. But the debt servicing costs, the PBO estimates, are expected to be $40 billion a year by 2025. I understand investing in healthcare. I understand investing in programs that mean something to Canadians. But there is a lot of money that could be eventually going towards programs that your government will instead be using to service the cost of the debt. Is that not an issue?
Well, debt servicing costs are always an issue, Vashi. You're absolutely right. When the government looks at its fiscal position, things like future interest rates, debt servicing costs, these are all things the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister take into consideration when elaborating the commitments we're able to make to Canadians in a budget. The good news is this agreement will give us an opportunity to present to Parliament, and we believe have adopted 4 budgets. So over the lifespan of this government, you'll see a series of measures that we think will grow the Canadian economy, will contribute to the prosperity of the country, but will also fix some long-standing issues of equity and fairness and affordability that, frankly, Canadians elected our government on a number of months ago. But we're not pretending that, for example, debt servicing costs are not a factor. Of course they are. And that's why we think we'll have a reasonable plan to lay out for Canadians in the coming weeks.
Just have a few seconds, Minister. Are you going to lead or be on the oversight group that's mentioned in this agreement?
Vashi, I don't know. That is the kind of decision I'm sure that the Prime Minister will make over the next number of days. But I have a number of constructive relationships with opposition MPs, not only in the NDP, but in other caucuses as well. So I'll, of course, do my part to make sure that Parliament continues to work.
Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Vashi. Have a great evening.
So what does the new pact change for the Conservatives? Candice Bergen is the interim leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the official opposition. She's in Ottawa. Hi, Ms. Bergen. Good to see you.
Hi, Vashi. Good to see you. Welcome back to Parliament Hill.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Earlier today, I listened to you talk about this deal, and you characterized it, or the agreement, as a backdoor deal that flies in the face of openness. But the agreement is posted in its entirety for Canadians to see. How does that fly in the face of openness?
Well, the Liberals and NDP didn't tell Canadians they were planning to do this, certainly, and I asked the Prime Minister today, they didn't tell Canadians during the election or after the election. There's no urgency going on right now on Parliament Hill. No one's trying to force an election, and so they could have told Canadians, here's what we're looking at doing, and here's why we're going to do it, and here's what we propose, and at least give Canadians the opportunity to provide feedback in one way or the other, provide Parliament the opportunity to provide feedback. So come on, let's face it, they've been meeting, they've been talking, they have told no one about it, and they approved it last night, and it's their backroom deal.
You also labeled it, though, undemocratic. And I wonder, I think of other examples. This kind of agreement isn't without precedent. There's BC in 2017, Ireland in 2020, Theresa May's Conservative Party in 2017 in the UK, and its agreement with the Democratic Unionist Party. Are they all undemocratic?
It's a coalition between 2 parties that did not present this to Canadians in an election that just happened a couple of months ago. There are a lot of people who voted NDP in the last election who did not want a Liberal government, and I would say millions more who voted for a Liberal government that did not want an NDP government. And now both Liberals and NDP, Canadians, have an NDP Liberal government. So Canadians will have to decide how democratic that is.
Respectfully, though, it's not a coalition, right? A coalition would have representation in cabinet. It's an agreement to support the government through a period of time on motions of confidence, just like the one that occurred in the UK. How is that, honestly, how is that undemocratic? You may not like it. Lots of Canadians may not like it. It may be politically not something that's appetizing to those Canadians or to your party. But isn't undemocratic an unfair criticism?
Well, they have a written agreement to govern together, to govern until they actually have a date how long they're going to be governing together. They may even govern past that. We don't know how much and in what way Jagmeet will support the Liberals. Is there any red line that he won't cross? We don't know that. We know that they are going to be planning to have meetings that exclude the Bloc and the Conservatives. Will they have access to cabinet material and to legislation, for example, before opposition parties will, before Canadians see it? So they have a formal agreement in place, and it's to govern as a majority until at least 2025. So we call it whatever you'd like. I call that it's a coalition agreement, and clearly the result of that is that there will be right now a NDP Liberal government, majority government here on Parliament Hill, governing Canadians.
My understanding from listening to Mr. Singh, and you brought up that idea, is there a red line? It's not absolute support. It's support in terms of confidence motions, confidence legislation that ends up being a confidence vote, supplemental to that. But it's not absolute. It's not everything. And he said he's entering into it like a marriage, hoping it works, but it may not. He may withdraw. Isn't that fair? I mean, isn't that still a mode through which he can hold the government to account?
Well, let's look at how they've been operating just even since the election. The moment that the government put confidence on any kind of motion that we put forward. For example, we wanted to establish a committee around corruption, looking at some of the scandals the Liberals were involved in. And guess who the first party was that supported them literally a couple of days after Parliament reconvened after the election? It was the NDP. The NDP consistently support the Liberals, especially when the Liberals would threaten confidence. So I don't really have a lot of faith in Jagmeet's position in terms of, well, you know, that we're just going to support them sometimes. Listen, this is an NDP Liberal government that Canadians woke up this morning having to accept. And listen, let's be frank. Yes, this is an issue around Parliament, transparency, democracy, I believe, but even greater, it's an issue around the pocketbooks of Canadians. The spending that these two parties plan to do is, I think we haven't even measured the amount. I mean, the NDP platform itself is over $214 billion. Canadians are going to have to pay for that at a time when inflation is almost at 6%. Rent is through the roof. Housing costs are through the roof. Gasoline is, groceries. I'm surprised the NDP have abandoned their base so quickly. The NDP used to care about what the cost of living was like, how much people had to pay rent, or single parents, or seniors, or people who were on a fixed income, how they were dealing with the cost of living. The NDP have just thrown their support behind everything these Liberals do, and it's shocking to watch.
In fact, though, for example, what you just outlined, people who don't have access to services, who are lower income, the elderly, that is exactly who, for example, the dental care proposal would cover, the 35% approximately of Canadians who don't have insurance for dental care. Yes, it comes with a price tag, and I understand the concern around increased government spending. But your party also advocated in the last election for, I think it's $28 billion of transfers to provinces for healthcare, investing in healthcare without any conditions attached to it, which also would have added to the government's spending by, a bigger proportion than what the NDP is proposing in this agreement.
And so what's your question on that?
My question is it hypocritical for you to criticize the NDP and the Liberals for making healthcare investments when those investments aren't even as large as the one that you want the federal government?
Well, we just did complete an election, and Canadians did not vote for an NDP government. They certainly didn't vote for an NDP Liberal government, and with that kind of spending. Now, if you want to talk about transfers, healthcare transfers to the provinces, we do believe that healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction and that the government has a responsibility to be providing adequate funding to provinces for healthcare. And we think actually this is a problem that we've seen with Liberals, and now clearly with this marriage, this coalition, they're going to be wading into provincial jurisdiction more and more and more. So we don't think that's the right thing to do, but this is not what Canadians asked for. It's not what Canadians chose, and the Liberals have just gone ahead. And again, why now? Where's the urgency? There's other examples that you've given of formal coalitions that were agreed upon when there was instability, when there were reasons, there was a possibility of a government being overthrown, maybe confidence being threatened. Why did this happen now? Has anyone asked that question?
I certainly will when I interview the parties involved. But with respect to the question I asked you, you didn't answer the substance of it. I understand the argument for transfers to provinces. I understand the argument around provincial jurisdiction. But the amount of money your party has advocated to transfer to provinces greatly outstrips the amount of money the NDP is advocating for the Liberals to invest.
Conservatives believe that we should, first of all, not be interfering in provincial jurisdiction. We do believe that there is an obligation and responsibility for the federal government to provide healthcare transfers that are sustainable to the provinces. That's a very different platform, by the way, political platform, election platform that the electorate voted on in the last election. That's very different than what we're seeing. Now, by the way, we haven't even seen what they're proposing. We haven't seen the budget. All we know is we have an agreement that was cooked up last night, or we don't even know when exactly it was cooked up, before the election, during the election. They have cooked up this agreement. They have done it without presenting the plan to Canadians. Where's the money coming from? Is it a full dental plan? Is it a pharmacare plan? This is all just some highlights that were on TV this afternoon. This morning, actually, and Canadians are supposed to just accept it. So we're the opposition. We will continue to be the opposition. We won't change in that way. We're going to continue to do our job. And what we're seeing happen, I just don't see, Vashi, how any Canadian, even if a Liberal voter, would look at this and say that this is what they voted for. And we have to call it out as it is.
Okay, Ms. Bergen, I'm out of time. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.